Hello there. Did you have this title? It's a bit difficult to read because YouTube censorship, but it's diversity friendly, let's say, the Muslim groups that, do the thing. They're not known for being diversity friendly. In fact, they're known for being religious zealots, usually. But this Telegraph piece is trying to make a case for why these bureaucracy loving, HR obeying specific group of, violent armed religious zealots should be given a chance, I guess. The tone tries to be a bit more critical, but that's really my impression. So it says here, three men in camouflage combat fatigues met a handful of suited civilians within the captured city of Aleppo, it's in Syria. At a meeting on Monday, fighters of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, formally passed over responsibility for the city to the group's proto-government. With the administration of Bashar al-Assad ousted from Aleppo, HTS now has responsibility for a city of 2 million people. A symbolic ceremony published on their social media channels was meant to assure the public that the group was ready to govern as well as fight. In Western capitals, there is clear and understandable ambivalence about the group that has captured swaths of northwest Syria over the past week. Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, the HTS leader, has a 10 million US bounty on his head. He joined both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, before splitting from both groups and rejecting their extreme tactics. I'm not sure I believe that, honestly. Human rights groups have documented, certain awful kinds of violence against political opponents in the region of Idlib, which HTS has controlled since the battle lines against the Assad regime froze during the COVID pandemic in 2020. On Monday, the US, Britain, Germany, France, and the UK released a non-committal statement calling on all sides to de-escalate. While the brutality of the Assad regime's war on the opposition saw Syria's president become a pariah in the West, some officials cite the maxim that the enemy of my enemy can still be my enemy. Oh, so we now need to reason and explain why we don't want to be friends with these fanatics. Interesting. It's not enough that they, by and large have literally always declared people not of their religion an enemy and heathens, and they tend to try to oust us out of the planet. It doesn't really matter whether we are talking about Jews, like in my case, or Christians. If you remember, this is from The Guardian about 5 years ago. Persecution of Christians coming close to, ending of an entire people in Middle East. It's a report that was published in The Guardian, a left-wing rag. So it's not as though we actually have any instance in the past where such a group was friendly to minorities. And I'm talking minorities in the Middle East, mind you. You might be used to being the majority in the West, but in the Middle East, the minorities are Christians, Jews, Yazidis, Armenians, all of those different groups that are disappearing due to ethnic cleansing by the hands of certain, like I said, religious fanatics of the Muslim persuasion around our parts. So, do we have the rise of the first more moderate group of this sort? I highly doubt it. But they're clearly trying to make the case to Telegraph here, so let's give them a chance. Let's let them try and convince us. So it says here that as his fighters advanced into Aleppo, Jolani put out a series of statements intended to allay fears among the population, segments of which are aligned with the Assad regime. Essentially, it's the mostly non-Muslim parts or the minority parts, because the Assad regime tends to guarantee their safety and basic rights as an incentive to get them to support his rule, generally. It says here, fighters should not scare children, he said, while HTS channels eagerly broadcast clips of Christians in the city going about their business as normal. Afram Maloui, the Archbishop of Aleppo, promised that services would be unaffected by the takeover. I find it highly suspicious that you have a, Muslim religious fanatical group with this strong social media presence. They understand perfectly how to cater to the West, and they even use the same slogans like diversity is our strength, literally. It's just, it feels plastic. It feels fake. I don't know if this is actually something organic, like the result of, let's say, either social media savvy Muslims being part of this group and having high positions, or at least being advisors and listened to, or perhaps even Muslims who lived in the West and came back to the Middle East, or, in my opinion, more likely, it could be because they have patrons in the West. For those who are not aware, the Assad regime in Syria is very closely aligned with Russia, and the West is currently in a war with Russia. So it is entirely possible that they are backing the other side, especially since they had a large part in, let's say, the creation of the Islamic State, both its creation and its growth, incidentally. There have been quite a few bits of evidence, let's say, in leaked emails and audio files and such. You can actually look them up on YouTube if you feel like it. I believe John Kerry said something about their hand in the growth of the Islamic State. So the idea that this is an organic group, in my opinion, highly unlikely, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. It says here that in March this year, Jolani addressed a cohort of top students at Idlib University, saying the rebels would have to build governments in the middle of war rather than after the conflict ends. Every brick built in the liberated areas advances us hundreds of kilometers towards a fundamental goal, which is the liberation of Damascus, God willing, he said. He's now putting the principle into practice. It says here garbage collection has already begun and electricity and water services have been reconnected. HTS has distributed phone numbers for local residents to inquire about administrative services. The General Zakat Commission, an Islamic tax collection agency that also deals with the poor, has started to distribute emergency baskets of bread, while HTS's General Organization for Grain Trade and Processing has provided fuel to bakeries to make sure they can continue production. In total, the Ministry of Development and Humanitarian Affairs claims it has delivered 65,000 loaves of bread to locals in a campaign they are dubbing Together We Return. Seriously, doesn't that really stink of modern Western HR departments? It really feels as though they are in contract and are advised by some sort of Western power, and they are essentially copying the playbook of a Western corporation. In a sign that the proto-state has its eye on international legitimacy as well as local favor, HTS's Political Affairs Department has provided phone numbers for foreigners and diplomats seeking to leave the city. There's also the matter of how to handle the remnants of the Assad regime. On Tuesday, the Salvation Government said any soldiers, police or security forces who surrendered would be granted amnesty. There have been no confirmed reports of reprisal endings so far. Meanwhile, residents have been told to contact Salvation Government officials if they come across weapon deposits, warning that anyone caught buying or selling ammunition will be punished. Since 2020, large numbers of refugees from Assad-held areas of Syria have lived under HTS rule. As Jolani's forces seize back more of the country, they have been keen to present themselves as facilitating the return of the displaced to their homes. Notice the language. Seize back more of the country. I'm sorry. Seize back for whom? Did this, the religious armed group, militant group, originally rule the country and then you had the Assad regime taking over? Because that's not how I remember it. What do you mean seize back? The language here is very friendly to this group. And once again, it's not as though I like Assad. Not particularly, honestly. I'm just very wary of, let's say, these very religious armed militias in general, and also of Western democracies backing horrible people. For those who do not remember, I say remember. For those who haven't read yet, I believe the New York Times, the paper of record, was quite complimentary of a certain Austrian painter in Germany in the 1930s, at first, before, he became more aggressive and tyrannical. So as far as eye for people, the left honestly has an awful record. Does anybody remember of the religious scholar, the way that they were essentially mourning the death of a certain very well-known leader of a organized militant religious group of the Muslim persuasion. They have had so many of these awful judgments, and no, I can't say that I believe them. They have no credibility in my eyes at all. I do find it funny, though, that they can sort of get away with this to their audience. They have been so ingrained with the notion that the world is divided into oppressor and oppressed, and the West is the oppressor, and then you have, the developing world and third world countries as the oppressed. And if Assad is backed by Russia, therefore he is the oppressor, especially since he's protecting local minorities that are, in the West majorities, and so clearly not deserving of any pity by the reckoning of the left. Seriously, I have never known another group that is so hostile to members of its own. It's just, hey, did you know that there's a literal ethnic cleansing of Christians in the Middle East? Nobody cares if they're left-wing Christians. Oh, did you know that there's Muslims being harmed in China? Oh, that's awful. That's awful. The Uyghur Muslims. It's just, why? Why is there no sympathy and no, how to put it? No one bothering to protest or raise their voice on the left for minorities that aren't Muslims and are harmed in Muslim-controlled lands. It's something that happens all the time. If you look at the number of minorities living, the percentage, as well as the raw numbers of minorities living in the Middle East, they've been shrinking awfully, except in Israel. Christians, Yazidis, you had Armenians, you had Jews, you had a lot of just different minorities, and they just tend to evaporate into thin air as the patience of certain religious fanatics ruling Muslim lands tends to fray over time naturally. And I'm not blaming every single Muslim. Unfortunately, the people who tend to come into power are the most extreme ones. They're probably because they're the most violent and ruthless and fanatical. All the same, the end result is the great human suffering that you can definitely see if you are willing to look further than the mainstream media. It says here, social media has been filled with video clips of emotional family reunions in a boost to the group's efforts to win hearts and minds. That was after they cleaned up some previously blocked roads. eClean, an HTS-aligned company that clears up public spaces, cleared some roads and allowed for renewed travel. I'm sorry, but this really does smack of Western intervention. It says here that the treatment of minorities will be under particular close watch. Jelani issued a number of recommendations, statements, and notices to make sure that no one harasses or harms the Christian or Kurdish community. They also make sure to highlight the diversity of Syrian culture and heritage, stating Aleppo is a meeting place of civilization with cultural and religious diversity for all Syrians. I'm sorry, the language does not sound Islamic in any way, it does not sound Middle Eastern in any way. It sounds like a very diverse Californian HR meeting. It says here, in the initial days after the takeover of Aleppo, they've largely abided by their word, but questions remain on how integrated minorities can be in an HTS administration. In the past, Jelani has engaged with Syrian and with Christian and Druze in Idlib, and there is a Directorate of Minority Affairs within the Salvation Government, but they do not have representation within the government's General Consultative Council. Consultative Council. Interesting. Isn't that basically repeating the same word twice? The same root? Never mind. Neither do women, though they are far more active and public in society in general. It's not just minorities who might be fearful of coming under HTS rule. The majority of Sunnis disagree with the HTS government and its hardline Islamic principles. Several activists have been imprisoned and, let's say, physically harmed in bad ways. In early 2024, a protest movement against Giuliani's rule in Idlib erupted, with the leader accused of amassing too much power and acting tyrannically. In response, HTS created a complaints committee for all the areas it controls, issued a general amnesty for non-criminal prisoners, and cancelled residential building fees. It also formed a committee it claimed would help broaden the pool of people admitted to leadership positions. Under Giuliani, HTS has transformed itself dramatically, splitting away from its explicitly, I can't say that word on YouTube, armed Muslim fanatical roots. This new stage might provide another platform for evolution. Certainly, the group's institution building over the past 4 years has positioned it well to consolidate battlefield victories into a much larger state-building project. Incidentally, state-building definitely sounds like the warmonger in the US, both the Republican and the Democrat warmongers, although honestly, they're both really one party now in the Democrats, with Dick Cheney, for example, endorsing Kamala Harris. But while it may be far more liberal than the Islamic State or the Taliban, Giuliani and his forces remain at heart an authoritarian armed group. If they are to win support among distrustful locals and grudging acceptance from the watching West, they will have to make sure that the plethora of bureaucratic initiatives launched in recent days are more than just a PR operation. And that's exactly the conclusion I would want to focus on. A PR operation by way of bureaucratic initiatives. Standard left-wing Western tactics. They seriously seem to be aligned with, possibly even the brainchild of, if not outright economically supported by, left-wing Western powers. That's my conclusion from reading this. It is very funny, though, to hear a terrorist going, "Diversity is our strength." I mean, it sounds like a South Park episode. It honestly does. I remember hearing the same mantra from which African nation's leader was it? Basically, they, on the one hand, make it basically illegal to be gay, and I do believe that they have a specific hatred for white people. But on the other hand, they just spout, well, we have to protect the LGBTQIA plus community, and diversity is our strength. I honestly feel as though there is a certain attempt to co-opt third world countries through money and influence by left-wing governments, the EU, maybe the UN. And it results in a sort of clash of civilizations between not the Western civilization, but the woke one with the Muslims. And if Western civilization clashes with third world civilizations due to quite a difference of worldviews, let's say we differ quite a bit. I'm not sure if we differ more than we are alike, but we definitely differ quite a bit. The woke civilization differs completely. It literally does not align on pretty much anything other than opposition to the traditional West. That's pretty much the only point of agreement between the woke and the sort of third world. I mean, if the West is at war with the woke over, let's say, the place of traditional gender roles and family in our society, then Islamic and third world forces are even more so. And it's the same when it comes to feminism, gay rights, basically everything that there is a certain level of disagreement in the West, abortion. It's just Islamic and third world forces would be far, far more to the right on these issues than anyone on the West. And yet they basically, how to put it, just shower them with money and influence in exchange for them parroting their slogans. That's my guess, obviously, personal opinion. Because otherwise, why would they do this? Why would you ever have the leader of this fanatical group going, "Diversity is our strength"? There's no logical, ideological connection that can be made. I don't think so. If anyone actually can puzzle this one out, I would love to hear about it in the comments. It's just so alien to each other. that it's laughable. It's grotesque. I mean, it sounds like a Babylon Bee article, you know? I honestly think it used to be more fun to suggest such things to satirical websites before they were actually true. Now it's just, hey, can you present this absurd reality instead of actually taking it a bit too far to make it comical? It's impossible to parody anything, honestly. Still, though, I think we can hope that with recent shifts in the West, we'll have less conflict spilling over, because in my opinion, at least in part, this is a conflict in the West, between Western powers and Russia, spilling over to the Middle East. We'll have more stability. We had no new wars under Trump last time. Hopefully he can resolve these conflicts, and we will have more peace and prosperity and less uncertainty. I would personally be very appreciative of not having to run away to the guarded space when the sirens sound every week a couple of times. That would be swell. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.